Have you ever
I
had
feel
a
like we
moment
really
where a single
connect.
sentence
I
changed
feel it too. It's
everything?
special.
I'm
Where
glad.
honesty collided with kindness in a way that left you breathless? If you've ever struggled with vulnerability or wondered if good people still exist in this complicated world, this story might just restore your faith. Before we dive in, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe, because stories like this one deserve to be shared. Morgan stared at the restaurant menu, her stomach tightening with each price she read. The elegant bistro that Ethan had chosen for their third date was beautiful: soft lighting, exposed brick walls, and wine glasses that caught the light like crystal prisms. But all she could see were the numbers beside each entree, each one representing hours of work at her teaching job. $28 for pasta. $35 for salmon. Even the salads cost more than what she typically spent on groceries for 3 days. She hadn't expected this. Their first 2 dates had been casual: a coffee shop where they'd talked until closing time, and then a walk through the city park where they'd watched a free concert. Ethan had mentioned wanting to take her somewhere special this time, and she had agreed without thinking. Without calculating. Without remembering that her car insurance was due next week and that her student loan payment had just cleared, leaving her bank account uncomfortably empty. Ethan smiled at her from across the table, his kind eyes crinkling at the corners. At 42, he was 8 years her senior, with silver beginning to thread through his dark hair at the temples. There was something steady about him that had drawn her in immediately, a quiet confidence that came from weathering life's storms and remaining intact. "The ribeye is amazing here," he said, closing his menu decisively. "I had it last time I came with a client." Morgan nodded, still scanning the menu with increasing panic. She had exactly $67 in her checking account until payday, and her portion of this meal would easily consume most of that. Her throat felt dry as she realized she had two choices: go into overdraft or admit the truth. "Ethan," she began, her voice smaller than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I think I made a mistake. She looked down at her napkin, twisting it between her fingers. "I can't afford this date." The words hung in the air between them. Morgan felt heat climb her neck to her cheeks. In the silence that followed, she imagined all the ways he might respond: awkwardness, disappointment, perhaps even judgment. They'd been getting to know each other for nearly 3 weeks, but revealing financial vulnerability felt like exposing a wound. When she finally dared to look up, Ethan was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Then he smiled, not the polite smile of someone masking discomfort, but something warmer and more genuine. "Thank you for telling me," he said simply. "It takes courage to be honest about things like that." Before she could respond, he reached across the table and gently took the menu from her hands. "Let's go somewhere else." "But you've been wanting to try this place," Morgan protested, feeling both relieved and embarrassed. "I've been wanting to spend time with you," Ethan corrected her. "The restaurant is just scenery." 20 minutes later, they were sitting on a bench by the river, paper containers of street tacos in their laps and paper cups of horchata beside them. The entire meal had cost less than $18. "This is actually perfect," Ethan said, watching a boat glide by on the water. "Much better view than that stuffy restaurant." Morgan took a bite of her carnitas taco, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to ease. "I'm sorry about back there. I should have said something sooner." Ethan shook his head. "Can I tell you something? When Emma's mom left us, she emptied our joint account first. I had to learn how to feed a 3-year-old on practically nothing while rebuilding my life from scratch." Morgan knew that Ethan was a single father to now 12-year-old Emma, but he rarely spoke about his ex-wife. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was the hardest time of my life," he admitted. "I remember standing in a grocery store, calculating every item I put in the cart, and still having to put back a carton of eggs at checkout because I'd miscounted. I was so ashamed I couldn't look the cashier in the eye." Morgan's throat tightened. "How did you get through it?" "One day at a time. I learned to cook instead of ordering takeout. I found free activities for Emma instead of paid ones. I built a budget and stuck to it, even when it was painful. He turned to face her more fully. But the most important thing I learned was that there's no shame in having limits. The shame comes from pretending you don't. That's why you weren't upset when I said I couldn't afford dinner. That's exactly why, Ethan said. Your honesty told me something important about your character. You chose integrity over appearance. Do you know how rare that is? As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the water, Morgan felt something shifting between them. Something deeper than the easy conversation and attraction of their previous dates. Ethan had seen her vulnerability and met it not with judgment but with understanding, even appreciation. Later that night, as he walked her to her door, he asked if she would join him and Emma for a homemade dinner that weekend. Fair warning, we make pizza from scratch on Fridays. It gets messy, and Emma is very serious about her topping distribution strategy. Morgan found herself smiling. I'd love that. What Morgan didn't know that night was that her simple act of honesty had changed the course of her relationship with Ethan. Having been burned by relationships built on facades and half-truths, Ethan had promised himself that the next person he allowed into his and Emma's life would be someone real, someone who valued truth over impressions. The Friday dinner turned into a regular tradition. Morgan discovered that Emma was whip-smart and funny, with her father's kind eyes and an artist's sensitivity. The three of them fell into an easy rhythm of movie nights, board game competitions, and weekend hikes that cost nothing but created memories worth everything. 2 months into dating, Morgan found herself sitting at Ethan's kitchen table, helping Emma with a science project while Ethan prepared dinner. The domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly, how natural it felt to be here, how effortlessly she'd been folded into their lives. Dad says you're a math wizard, Emma said, looking up from her notebook. Is that why you're so careful with money? Morgan blinked, surprised by the question. I suppose being good with numbers helps, but mostly I'm careful because I have to be. Teachers don't make as much as we should. Emma nodded solemnly. Dad says that's messed up because teachers are super important. From the kitchen, Ethan cleared his throat. I may have used slightly different wording, Em. Morgan laughed. Your dad is right, though. But I love teaching, even if it means watching my budget carefully. Dad was super poor after Mom left, Emma said matter-of-factly. He used to cut my sandwiches into shapes to make me forget we were eating the same thing every day. Ethan appeared in the doorway, dish towel over his shoulder. Emma, he said gently, remember our conversation about personal stories? Emma rolled her eyes with the practiced expertise of a preteen. That some are ours to share and some aren't. But you already told Morgan about being poor, and besides, the sandwich shapes were awesome. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Morgan helped Ethan clean the kitchen. She's incredible, Morgan said. You've done an amazing job raising her. Some days I have no idea what I'm doing, Ethan admitted. But I try to teach her what matters: honesty, kindness, resilience. She's learning, Morgan said. The sandwich shapes were a nice touch. Ethan laughed softly. You do what you have to do. Those first few years were humbling. But they taught me what I really needed versus what I thought I needed. He put down the dish he was drying and turned to her. That night at the restaurant, when you told me you couldn't afford it, it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? That courage isn't about grand gestures. It's about small moments of truth when lies would be easier. Morgan's heart swelled with something that felt dangerously close to love. As their relationship deepened, there were challenges. Morgan's teaching schedule sometimes clashed with Emma's activities. Ethan occasionally had to work late to meet deadlines for his graphic design clients. Money remained tight for Morgan, and while Ethan was now financially stable, he maintained the careful habits formed during harder times. Their first significant argument came 4 months in, when Ethan surprised Morgan with tickets to a weekend music festival she'd mentioned wanting to attend. This is too much, she said when he presented them. These tickets are expensive, Ethan. I wanted to do something special, he said. You've been working so hard with end-of-year testing, and I thought. I can't reciprocate gifts like this, Morgan interrupted, her voice tight. I can't match this. Ethan's expression shifted from excitement to confusion. I'm not keeping score, Morgan. Maybe not consciously, but eventually it will matter. Eventually you'll resent that I can't contribute equally. The real fear beneath her words hung unspoken, that their financial disparity would eventually create an imbalance that love couldn't overcome. Is that what you think of me? Ethan asked quietly. That I measure relationships in dollars and cents? No, Morgan said, suddenly exhausted. But it's what I've experienced before. They sat at his kitchen table as Morgan explained how her last serious relationship had crumbled under the weight of financial incompatibility. How her ex had begun with grand gestures but ended with subtle jabs about her career choices and income. How she'd promised herself she wouldn't become dependent on someone else's financial security again. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he took her hands in his. I was broke for 4 years after the divorce, he said. 4 years of counting pennies and lying awake worrying about bills. What pulled me through wasn't money, it was connection. It was friends who invited us for dinner when they knew we were struggling, family who watched Emma when I needed to take on extra work. What I learned is that relationships aren't balanced through equal spending. They're balanced through equal caring. He pushed the tickets toward her gently. I bought these because music brings you joy, and your joy matters to me. If it makes you uncomfortable, we don't have to go. But please don't reject the gesture because you're measuring its worth in dollars rather than intention. Morgan looked at the man across from her, this person who had transformed her understanding of what strength looked like. Who had shown her that vulnerability wasn't weakness but courage. Okay, she said finally. But I'm buying the gas for the drive and packing our food. Ethan smiled. Deal. The festival weekend became a turning point. Away from their daily routines, surrounded by music and starlight, they began talking about the future in ways they hadn't before. Not in grand declarations, but in quiet assumptions about shared tomorrows. By their 6-month anniversary, Morgan had become a fixture in the home Ethan shared with Emma. She had her own key, a drawer in his bedroom, and a special mug that Emma had painted for her that read, "World's Most Patient Math Magician." The three of them had created their own traditions, Sunday morning pancakes, Tuesday game nights, and monthly adventure days, where they explored somewhere new together on a tight budget. It was on one of these adventure days, while exploring a small coastal town 3 hours from home, that Ethan took Morgan's hand as they walked along the shore. I've been thinking, he said, his voice nearly carried away by the wind. My lease is up in 3 months. Morgan nodded. He'd mentioned this before. The apartment where he and Emma had lived since the divorce was being converted to condominiums. I'm looking at houses, he continued. Something with a yard for Emma, a better school district. Something with room to grow. Morgan's heart began to beat faster. That sounds wonderful for you both. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. I'm not being clear. I'm looking at houses for us. The 3 of us. If that's something you would consider. Morgan stared at him, the waves crashing behind them, Emma searching for shells several yards away. We haven't even been together a year, she whispered. I know, Ethan said. And I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to think about it. To be part of the process if you want to be. What about finances? Morgan asked, the practical question emerging before she could stop it. I can't afford half of a mortgage in this market. Ethan smiled. Who said anything about half? We would figure out what's fair based on our incomes. What matters to me is building a home with you, not the accounting. Morgan looked over at Emma, who had spotted them talking and was now walking toward them with her pockets bulging with treasures. This child who had accepted her with open arms, who trusted her to understand both math problems and adolescent confusion. And Ethan, this man who had never tried to hide his struggles or pretend to be something he wasn't. Who had shown her that real strength lived in honesty and vulnerability. "I'd like to be part of the process," Morgan said finally. "And I'd like to be part of your lives. Both of you." Emma reached them then, breathlessly showing off a perfect sand dollar she'd discovered. As she chattered about where they should display it in their new home, wherever that's gonna be, Morgan caught Ethan's eye over his daughter's head. The love she saw there was reflected in her own heart, built not on grand gestures or perfect circumstances, but on a foundation of truth laid that night when she had admitted, "I can't afford this date." 1 year to the day after that fateful dinner, Ethan took Morgan back to the riverside where they'd eaten street tacos. They sat on the same bench, the setting sun painting the water gold and crimson. "I have something for you," Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. "It's not traditional, but then, neither are we." He handed her a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a diamond ring, but a simple key on a silver chain. "It's the key to our new home," Ethan explained. "The offer was accepted yesterday. And this," he reached into his other pocket and pulled out a small ring box, "is a promise that you will always have a home with us, not because of what you can provide or afford, but because of who you are." The ring was modest but beautiful, a simple band with a small emerald that matched Morgan's eyes. "I'm not asking you to marry me today," Ethan said softly. "I'm asking you to continue building this life with us, one day at a time, knowing that I will never measure your worth by your wallet but by your heart." Morgan looked at the man before her, thinking of all the times in her life when she had hidden her financial struggles out of shame or fear. How that one moment of honesty, "I can't afford this date," had opened the door to the deepest love and acceptance she had ever known. "Yes," she said simply. "To all of it. Yes." Behind them, Emma emerged from where she'd been waiting anxiously with Ethan's sister. She ran to them, enveloping them both in a tight hug. "Does this mean we're officially a family now?" she asked, her eyes bright with hope. "It means," Morgan said, her voice steady and sure, "that we've been a family all along. We just needed time to recognize it." As they walked back to the car together, Morgan reflected on how differently this story might have ended if she had pretended that night at the restaurant. If she had silently put the meal on a credit card she couldn't afford to pay, or made an excuse to leave early. How a single moment of vulnerability had altered the course of 3 lives. Sometimes the most beautiful beginnings start with the words we're most afraid to say. Sometimes admitting our limits is exactly what opens us to limitless possibilities. And sometimes, finding someone who values your truth above all else is the greatest fortune of all. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear that honesty is the foundation of true connection. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the power of authenticity in a world that often values appearance over truth. Because in the end, it's not about what we can afford, it's about what we're brave enough to admit, and who stands beside us when we do.